right, I'm here with the one and only Jackson Sullivan, my dear friend, and we've done numerous podcasts in the past. This is our first one on the Joel Bine Show, and I think everyone's in for a treat. I mean, introducing you is not necessarily a simple task, but what I would say is that you are one of the, if not the only person in the world that really I resonate on all cylinders with, essentially. I get massive visibility from you in terms of our curiosity around philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and personal growth. And like, we have this zest for personal growth. You're the first person to show me the belief work. It's amazing to think how 5 years has gone by since then. But yeah, Jackson Sullivan, founder of The Gift, which is a whole nother podcast series to explain that. But welcome to the show.
I am so thrilled and grateful to be here. I really appreciate the things that you said. And the visibility coming through the shared reality is really interesting to me.
Shared reality is such an amazing need. Yeah, you mentioned that you're in the same place right now that you were when you recorded this video about praxis,
which I believe is the first ever video you saw of me.
Yeah, so what is that, 8 years ago? Yeah, it'll be 8 years this winter.
I would have, because I was 18. Well, I was actually 17 at the time. So I actually think I may have recorded that I can't even believe I'm saying this. I think I recorded that 9 years ago, which is hard for me to even fathom. It brings up like both, there's like happiness and like awe about my life and what's occurred since then. And then I also noticed there's some like, not everything has happened the way that I wanted in that 9 years. And I think that that's something that's probably quite common that people experience right around my age, probably for the first time. Of like, oh, wow, a lot of things have been amazing and other things didn't happen the way I wanted. And there's just different emotions that come with that. But it feels beautiful that that video was recorded here when I was 17. And now with me like visiting family for holiday time and being here at that same time of year in the same room, it's pretty cool. Full circle.
Yeah, that was the honest praxis review video that you made about the Praxis Career Launch College Alternative Program, which is the reason we connected, because I was lit up about that company, and then I reached out to you, and that's how it all got started. But that visibility I noticed on our first podcast 8 years ago was like the shared reality, the visibility. Oh, like we were riffing about Nathaniel Branden and self-acceptance and things like that. But yeah, now I want to riff on more things. We've been voice messaging back and forth lately, and one topic I want to launch us with is this idea of sort of habits and self-discipline and intrinsic motivation. And this, maybe we start with this word discipline, because I mean, just last night I went to this holiday event, and there was a little like introduction. Everyone went around the room, and they said what their word was going to be for the year. That kind of thing. And
I get it.
2 people said something along the lines of compassionate discipline.
Ooh.
And I was like, huh, because it almost, I don't know, I have such a, that, I think the word discipline has so many concepts like and connotations that are woven into it, that I've just kind of decided to let go of the word for my own paradigm, my own life. I don't really resonate with the word. I love the paradigm of something that you said on your recent new podcast. Um, you said when it comes to habits, doing what you truly want to
Yeah.
do and getting in touch with the actual highest desire when it comes to daily habits that might be in a traditional paradigm seen as, oh, you're doing this like difficult thing, or you're avoiding distractions, or you're doing this routine and so forth, and that's like the discipline of just showing up and chop wood, carry water, and that takes that like gumption and that ethic, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think there is a sort of, there's a truth in that, of whatever chop wood, carry water means. But I'm been questioning this whole paradigm around work versus play and doing things out of any sort of grinding mindset, and say, what if we could literally 100% liberate ourselves from that mindset and be in radical joy, intrinsic motivation, empathy, and play. Empathy meaning like empathy for your future self is a phrase that I like. So let's riff on that, shall we? Like maybe we could unpack any of that. Discipline, intrinsic motivation, habits. What's coming up for you?
Yeah. I'm thinking, yeah, I see how you connected now discipline to intrinsic motivation. So we chatted about that. Um, I'm starting to experience things with more simplicity. And I think that what's coming up for me is the idea that desire, there's like these animating impulses that we have. And we might call that like the life force within us. And there's impulses toward different directions. And I think that many impulses can express themselves in varying degrees of stress. And an impulse, let's say, to like make money, if that impulse expresses in a stressed way, then it feels like this craving. But if the exact same impulse, though, can be expressed in a way that is free of stress, but it's the same impulse to make money. And I think for me, taking all of the grind hustle culture, taking all of the like, more peaceful meditative culture, all these different elements, a lot of it does boil down to just like animating impulses in the body arise and how those impulses express is almost like modulated by the limiting beliefs in the overall nervous system. And so that impulse to make money, as a common example, if there's free of limiting beliefs and traumas around money, the impulse can express as just an authentic, empowered desire somatically. Like it's going to fully move in the body. And now I just feel the impulse to make money. And like we talked on our first podcast, if it's fully allowed, it'll probably actually literally animate the body to do the things. But if there's any constriction on like a microfascial level, or it's created by these limiting beliefs or stressful thoughts or whatever it is, any constriction in the flow of that impulse, now that exact same desire feels like anxiety and stress. And so I think that a lot, in some ways, letting go of the quote unquote hustle culture or any of that isn't necessarily not doing things. It's just releasing the areas of stress so that then the most organic, authentic impulse can animate the body in a way that is effortless. That's the start. That's how I
Yes.
see it. That's a good. And then
I
for
love
me,
that
there's power in making it simple. Yeah,
distinction.
and just recognizing the impulse exists, clearing the fear may make the impulse go away entirely, but it may often just reveal a healthier expression of the exact same desire.
Yeah, so the friction, what we would call unhealthy friction perhaps, is the hustle culture, which is based on these limiting beliefs about work ethic and all sorts of things, tying work ethic to self-worth and things like that that we're conditioned with. And so if you can actually liberate yourself from that, then desire opens up. And it's like the sun was shining the whole time. We just need to remove those clouds. And then the animating force of creativity, the desire to build a company or make money or anything that is typically viewed as productivity or whatever, that can still happen. It's still a true need. We have a need for productivity or productive achievement or creative achievement or fulfillment, accomplishment. Um, I just see all this like, are we being aware of all of our needs in totality? That's why I've also said that often doing the thing that is challenging or productive or whatever is often a form of self-care. And that's a perspective I don't hear
I
very
have a
often.
question about
We
that.
think of self-care as like only doing the relaxation, but what if it's also doing the thing that you really love to do that asks you to be in an effort state?
I was going to ask if the self-care is it self-care to be productive because the act of whatever it is helps to meet needs, but then I heard you say that if it's something that you truly desire to do, then it's also just it is intrinsically self-care in that it and of itself meets a need rather than just because I did this thing, now I'm able to make money to meet needs or whatever. I'm hearing you say that the act of doing thing that you want to do is caring for yourself, regardless of if that activity actually has like other layers of need meeting. Like just the act of doing it can
Yeah.
be a need meter, as opposed to like, oh, I cooked, so I meet my need for food. But the act of cooking itself could be part of the also getting the needs met.
Well, that's an interesting example.
Yeah, that
But I mean,
example
yeah, I think
that wasn't quite it,
fundamentally,
but I think am I reflecting it in a way that feels
I guess, I mean, essentially, I mean, self-care and self-love. So if I love myself so much that I have such a desire to build this company and have this regret-free life over the scope of the coming decades, and I love my future self so much, I'm like in contact with my 90-year-old self, right? Who wants me to have the most epic life or whatever, and I wouldn't want to like if I'm in touch with how me showing up regularly or me showing up to create and doing the challenging, effortful thing, creating, building, that's like I guess the idea of long-term delayed gratification is worth noting here. It's like I'm building something that I might not like I might not get that immediate some there might not be a full immediate pleasure with it. Now there could also be an immediate pleasure with it, but in some level there's a delayed pleasure. Um versus just eating a candy bar or something. There's like immediate pleasure versus if I'm building my
This
company
is so
and
important.
there's
Keep talking. I have
right.
lots
So
to
like,
say. I want you
okay,
to keep
so
sharing though, because there's yeah, this is
yeah.
very significant thing.
So it's having such a, it's almost like a hedonistic. Isaac Morehouse used to, he had this blog post years ago called Hedonism as Life's Purpose. And he was like marrying these two ideas of pleasure and purpose. And like, if you're so in touch with desire that like, I love myself, my future self so much, I want to build this company. I want to create this arc in my life, this story of my life. I want to impact in this way. I want to have this fulfillment and meaning and creativity and aliveness. All of that matters because I love life. Um, I would prefer to go build the company for these next 3 hours than to go and do something that would be, just for the short term pleasure. I would prefer to go build my company than to go eat donuts for the next 3 hours. Now that's an extreme polarity there, but like it's letting go of like the extrinsic motivation with self. It's like, am I fully in my desire, which means I desire to do this. But what happens for so many of us, I'll say, is that desire gets bogged down or mixed with the limiting beliefs and the conditioning, and so then these parts that are thinking we need to do work in an obligatory way and so forth, we fall prey to the hustle culture memes, and then it gets diluted, the desire. But I think the more we liberate ourselves from the conditioning, then we step into the full empowerment and desire for both short term and long term.
Yeah. I was watching an Alex Hormozy video, and at first I disagreed with him because he was kinda giving a critique of the follow your passion advice for, like, a young person that had, like, a great career in sales and said they weren't passionate and they left, and he was giving a video response to that and explaining why he doesn't agree with that advice. And at first, part of me was like, "Well, I don't know if I wanna disagree with that on, like, the don't do stuff you hate principle." But he was able to identify something that I thought was actually very true and powerful, and it relates to everything that you're saying about pleasure being delayed or instant. But he said that, any passion, quote unquote, anything you take great pleasure in, the monetization process may technically include things that you don't take great pleasure in. Doesn't have to be things that you hate, but things like literally setting up, if you're an artist, an Etsy store and building the accounts and setting up the emails. And if your barometer is, well, I'm not passionate about this, he just kind of made the point that, like, no, I don't want to take on the hustle culture vibe, not even just from him, but just in general, that, like, oh, there you have to grind through all the shitty admin stuff. I don't want to see it that way. But he made a principle that was having something that you care about enough to do all of the admin stuff is a more powerful motivator than only thinking about what you're passionate about. And then in some ways, he didn't say this, I'm just expanding now. And I think I'm kind of putting it together in my own way. But yeah, there's a lot of power in recognizing that, oh, yeah, like capital S self, myself cares about things. Like I care about the world and about the totality of humanity experiencing peace forever. And maybe if I'm like if I'm somatically connected to my care and my authentic desire, it feels purposeful to do the admin things. It feels like it doesn't actually have to be painful at all. I think that's where I deviate a little bit from the hustle culture advice that's like, no, you just got to get through all this stuff. Don't just follow a passion. You just got to do the shit that's hard, and it's going to be hard. In my experience, the more connected I can be to a mature, embodied care for something that I deeply want to have happen. So it's a deep, mature desire. Um, the more connected I am to that, and the more relaxed I can be in my body while I'm feeling that, those things become easier. Those things that are typically seen as
Yes.
hard, and now they're easy, which almost yeah, and he said something else which I thought was powerful, and I kinda spin it back to you in a second, but he said that, addiction is limiting the amount of things that bring you pleasure, and the opposite of addiction is expanding the amount of things that give you pleasure. Like, I personally believe
Mm,
you can take pleasure, even in the immediate sense, when you're like when we're fully relaxed. I think we can take pleasure in even the admin stuff. And this is
right.
where I'm curious. This is actually where I'm curious what your thoughts are, because I sometimes am still working out internally that it's like this. There's some integration that I think is like inclusive of the collectivist and the individualist, or like because there's certain like Eastern Asian texts that go into this a little bit of like take pleasure in everything, like getting more into that Eckhart Tolle like present moment. Like don't necessarily even create the limitation of something that you don't like, because that implies an aversion and like a tension in your being. And so take pleasure in it all. But in some ways that can be used where there can be a loss of individual purpose. And whether or not that's bad is a whole conversation. But there's certain cultures throughout history that were more collective minded, and your role isn't necessarily do what you love. It's become enlightened in peace and then simply do the things that are present to you. Like this, I guess this is my role in this overall creation of this experience. And then you just kind of surrender to that. Um, I don't want to get too off the rails, but I
Yeah.
think there's the last piece I'll say on that is I want your reflection on is I think that there's a lot of power in that when it's not used to actually
Yeah.
suppress the individual desire, but the integration of that
Yes.
individual desire while also recognizing, oh, that's what I meant about there's something you care about enough to pull you forward that in some ways is beyond you, but not in some ways you're like surrendering
Yes.
to something more, but it's not necessarily I think there's an integration with the individual, and I'm curious
There
how
is.
you
I love the phrase mature desire,
Yeah, me too.
and I think
Yeah.
that's integrating these two pieces together. When that integrating those two together, individual and devotion to something bigger, is, I think, that mature desire potentially. So I want to speak to that surrendering or devotion to something bigger, because I can draw on this as uh, uh, as a classical musician conductor and my devotion towards the music. Um, and there's so much in that domain around you are there to serve the music. You're serving
Sweet.
the composer's intentions, especially as a conductor. Like this is like you're there as this conduit between the musicians and the composer, and then beyond that, like ideally you're creating this ineffable, powerful, artistic, beyond the mundane experience. That's you could even say that's like this godlike experience at its peak, if you can facilitate that. And so that whole that north star for the conductor is often what drives people to be so dedicated and like fervorous in their daily actions and tasks, right? Whether that's studying the music or doing the admin thing, or just you know there's so much fervor because people have been they've become they've caught this obsession, they've caught this bug of whatever made them tick to that desire to become a classical musician, and there's something that hooked them in. And that's why you go into a school of music and people are just like heads down. So many people are just heads down, like devoted to growing as a musician and so forth, because something hooked them in, and that's the greater why, right? So when we talk about passion, I mean passion, of
Oh, it's a
course,
healthy use of
actually
passion. Yeah.
well, it can definitely can turn into unhealthy, which I can get to, but the I think that a healthy version of passion is that devotion to the why, um, and then integrating that with the individualism and this desire and the hedonism even is sort of the interesting game to spiral up into, um, because I think I've also seen people be in this self-sacrificial mindset of being in this devotion to the greater purpose or the role in the institution or and,
Altruism.
and yeah, just altruism, dedication to the craft or the organization and so forth, and then which is kind of what steered me away from my original track to be in academia. I mean, there's lots of reasons for that, but that's one of the reasons I was like, there's so much of this culture about like you're just devoted to the institution of the students in a self-sacrificial way. Um, and so I've been always curious about this integration because I think there is so much value, like you're saying, to the devotion. Like I care so much about what I'm giving, right? But then not self-sacrificing and the true mature desire is integrating in no, like I have so much desire um to meet my own needs and to meet the needs of others. To express my desires and to help others, support others in their desires being expressed and so forth. That's the healthy intrinsic motivation, right? And you're in touch with that and then you don't burn yourself out and you actually like you've mentioned this term before as well, like you're resourced in your daily
Yes.
actions. You have the
Yeah.
energy, and that's this well, that's the impulse to create, and you're in touch with that, and that's when I think you're really fully in the flow.
I would say that's probably what people are referring to when they say flow state, is when and the way I see it somatically is when there's again, this is where we get to the boundaries of identity a little bit, but when there's almost something else carrying you in the action that isn't requiring the conscious effort, but it's the body is just animated. And I don't wanna go too esoteric too fast, but I think that there's something about it with this concept of movement. I've really tried to distill all of the different concepts into as simple of definitions as possible. And so when we talk about work or grind or doing it's all just it's the difference between stillness and movement. I like the most fundamental if you're an alien that doesn't even know what a human is, it's like when you're on the computer, your hands are moving, something is moving, and then there's stillness. And so I bring that up because the force that moves you can be a force that feels peaceful, and that's, I think, what people are experiencing when it's flow state, is that movement, the flow, the literal movement is just happening, and that's how it can almost feel, and it can't and especially, I think, if we've been long identified with our mind and disconnected from, like, our heart or our inner body, stomach, or overall, like, lower nervous system, I think this has been my experience that sometimes experiencing the force that moves from, like, a deeper level of power and within can almost feel like something other than I, and that can be like, "Whoa," because 'cause I've been so identified with more of a mental or neck up operational being that then it can almost feel unstable and strange when my mind remains fully relaxed, but my body is still in movement, and it's in coherent animated movement, and I think that I guess heart mind or heart brain coherence, as they've done some studies, I understand, is probably when both are operating in full unity. where there's a combination of the conscious desire and will and the subconscious animating principle are almost in perfect riding on the same like wave, like a surfer. And yeah, it feels, I don't know exactly how I got there, but I do feel that that is what the flow state is probably. Even on like a nervous system
Yeah,
scientific level, it's when there's that, yeah, move. And again, I think it's the same thing as I said before, that probably I think that movement is just modulated by how much tension is in the nervous system created by the thoughts and beliefs. And yeah, it is the
yeah.
good.
The flow, I think, and if you read the book Flow and like the research on the flow is related to that, like losing yourself. That's the what everyone reports basically. Is when you're in the flow state, you sense that you've lost yourself. Um, and so I think that there's that connection to devotion to the something bigger. But I'm curious about the what I've also and also in that book Flow, he talks about in order to enter into flow requires like the initial effort to initiate the concentration state, which would take extra effort compared to if you just were in a passive state. Um, and so there's a degree of challenge. And so I think there's I think when you're in mature desire, you're in intrinsic motivation, we still have challenge and effort or non-stillness movement. Um, however, what I'm curious about is it necessary to engage in any level of willpower, um, commanding, demanding of self or parts in order to like get past the friction that people assume is just that's just the way it is. Where there's going to be this some sort of resistance to getting the effort going because it's easier to just be still. But I think the distinction lies, and this kind of brings up like Stephen Pressfield's work and what is resistance. I think I think there's necessary healthy resistance, and then there's unnecessary unhealthy resistance. The unnecessary resistance is the parts that have limiting beliefs. But you can still, in a fully integrated human with no limiting beliefs, we would still have the effort and challenge necessary to initiate the flow state. You follow that?
I'm not sure I 100% agree, but I would love to share like a
Okay.
slight additional perspective because
Yeah.
mostly on the same page, but I go back and forth on using the word challenge. You know, I know most people are in agreement in this kind of philosophy of not necessarily calling things hard or difficult. And sometimes I like the word challenge because it implies more, doesn't have to mean difficult. It can just mean a
Right.
growth opportunity that's new and exciting. And I think redefining negative words is just as powerful as eliminating them in certain contexts. And that's a whole podcast, actually. um, but um, I think that what we might refer to as the natural resistance, like I said, trying to simplify things as much as possible, we might experience somatic awareness of entropy, which I believe is the term for friction in a way. Um, you know, there's gravity, we could say, quite literally, is something that our animating force almost operates, it seems, in the moment against in order to produce an animation. Whereas the unanimated objects like rocks, they don't seem to apply any additional force that is contrary to gravity. And so I think the natural resistance can be a literal awareness of the law of physics that we experience in this reality, and the fact that it seems that our body consumes energy in order to actually animate. And so we can be aware of that experience. But I think that that is almost indistinguishable from the type of inner tense resistance that comes from parts that are not agreed in how to fulfill needs. And then that experience of inner limiting beliefs and inner resistance, I think that that is very different from when you feel completely empowered, but you're just aware of gravity. Um, so I hope that makes sense.
So a fully integrated human without limiting beliefs, which I believe we could in theory is possible.
Absolutely.
Yes. So because there's a finite number of
Finite.
neural
That's it.
pathways
Finite number.
that
Exactly.
are the limiting beliefs.
Exactly.
Yes. So in because again, like in terms of day-to-day application, like the reality is for almost all humans, if not all humans, there are parts that have some sort of limitation conditioned into them in this present moment on this planet. Um, mm, but like in terms of what's the North Star in terms of achieving, moving towards this mature desire framework.
Whole
Um,
self embodiment.
yeah. So in that state, you're saying, um, when it comes to, well, let's say a writer who's going to sit down to write this novel that's going to take hours a day for a year to complete the just the draft, right? There's a degree of concentration required for that flow state to access the creative mind and so forth. So you're saying a fully integrated human in that situation, um, prior to entering the writing session, it would be a sense of like just riding the wave, like
Uh,
it would just be a
uh,
natural flow, like coming at you. You wake up and you drink some water, and then you're like, all right, I feel like my desire is pulling me to go create, and there's no sort of second thought, and you just enter flow.
I think, I mean, yeah, I'm not quite ready to marry to a concept yet, but I do feel that, or I do in this moment think that full self or whole self embodiment is almost a synonymous term as living in what we call the flow state, where,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
Keep
yeah, there's
going.
something because it's worth noting too. It's been very powerful for me lately. Again, to try to, I keep saying like bringing things down to their first principles and whole self, flow state, embodied, like these different things were really, I think, just looking at the movement and then whatever tension exists in the body when that movement is happening. And if there's no tension, except for necessary tension being like technically tension is created to move an arm. But if you have a beautiful dancer who's like dancing in this just a pristine peace and flow, technically there's tension being created, but
Yes,
there's no
yes.
unnecessary tension. And you mentioned that the unnecessary resistance. Um, it's actually just about being an efficient machine. It's like the whole self embodied state is really just a nervous system. And really, I've actually been changing over just to say body because nervous system is kind of a buzzword because it's a particular part of the body. But really, the body, when there's a body that has no more unnecessary tension, I believe that that moment is also the experience of whole self embodiment and permanent flow state. To bring it to the first principles, like what's happening is a machine that is not experiencing any kinks in the hose. There is the energy of animating force from within moves without constrict.
Yeah, I love that. For some reason, part of me is triggered by the word machine, but
Oh, really? That's so
I
powerful.
don't know
Oh,
why.
I think it might be for a lot
It's
of
like,
people,
oh,
actually. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, with the advance of AI and technology of making humanoid-looking organic robots, I think that,
right.
we all get to contemplate our relationship to the concept of machine and how it relates to what we are.
I think what the charitable interpretation of what you're getting at in that context with that word is like unencumbered human, without without the kinks in the hose. We could, call a hose a machine. There's no kinks, right? And so the water is able to flow. So if there's
Exactly.
no kinks in the body, um, the neurology
Exactly.
that is the limiting beliefs, then we just flow. And so I think what you're saying in terms of that example with a writer is that there wouldn't necessarily be a difference between being actually writing versus you are like eating breakfast. You're saying like the flow would be equal,
So I
or like
think it's unlikely that if you had a brain scan, unlikely that it would show
right.
the exact same thing in both moments. But
And they have done research on that with the flow
yeah,
state, that like it's a mild form of flow to be eating or to be driving, but compared to fully in the dancer and performing or the writer writing, it's much more different brain activity. I'm just kind of curious about when you're moving between these states, is there, I guess, is there like a moment where you need to, what I've called in the past, like puncture the membrane of resistance in order to activate the flow state, of the creative process of that like deeper flow. Like there could be some sort of, there's going to be, because it doesn't, it seems to be a correlation with effort. It takes more effort to be writing than it is to be sitting on the couch staring at the ceiling.
yeah, I think the question, because as I got really into my nutritional health so substantially like never before recently, which was always a high interest, but it just kind of, it's like an unlock. I started to understand more that specific types of focus do consume energy and resources like different minerals and vitamins. So energy is required. And a lot of those different vitamins and minerals are to help modulate energy, electrolytes, and all these different. I don't need to go into full nutrition mode, but energy is required. And it does seem that energy is used in order to engage in deep focus flow like state. And it seems like sometimes certain types of flow state and certain types of focus might require a little more energy than the type of flow state that might come from like watching a movie and just being in pure receptive. That requires energy too to process all that information, but it's different energy than advanced reasoning and, advanced tasks, which again, not to make it like we are, not to make any feel like I'm saying we're machines or whatever, but very similar to AI, right? High reasoning models require literal more energy and more cooling. And so when we are using advanced features of our human being, then we do seems like we require more energy and more cooling and more water and more specific nutrients that actually allow for the energy to be used in our body most effectively. So that tells us that yes, maybe getting into the writing flow or getting into whatever it is, it might be that there's a change. There can be a change in, I guess, if we're like a car, there can be a change in how fast, how much acceleration is on the throttle. Um, I would just say that I think that the transition from one activity to the next can be smooth. That's
Yeah.
really what it
I
boils
think if
down
you're,
to. I keep talking about movement, right? Like, can that be a smooth transition, which is a different, I'm not saying that means no effort, but kind of, right? If there's a tension that's used to kind of compensate over something that implies
right,
some kind of other resistance than just the pure resistance of gravity. And so that's why that
right.
puncture concept, I think, could be still like a little bit of an effort energy and not necessarily the pure animating principle within.
Yes. Effort, energy versus allowing.
Because there's an awareness
So
of
I,
the
I love the word
resistance.
allowing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, there's an awareness that as I enter into my creative state, moving from the couch to the easel or the notebook or the dance studio
totally.
or business building workstation, whatever, that there is going to be a difference in energy. And I think it again the meta here is like, are you fully in touch with your actual highest desire and like aligned with what you want to create? Which for many people at the moment, there's not always that self knowledge. I think you and I have actually gotten really vivid in many ways. So the but like I see it as there's two sides of this coin. Like, are you in touch with what you actually want, your greater why, short term and long term, your different horizons of focus, as David Allen calls it, and all right, have you cleared the limiting beliefs? And so when you have both, it seems that in theory you're fully aligned with your desire. You've cleared the beliefs. Now we just allow ourselves to move into the next state,
Correct.
the next segment of the day, as Abraham Hicks talks about.
Yeah, I had a thought about that right when you were saying it. Oh, I would say that the clearing of the limiting beliefs actually is what can help allow to become connected to the authentic
Sure.
desire. And that I guess it also happens in advance. But yeah, this kind of gets into, I think, you know, when that flow state is where we live as the desire, moving unencumbered, there's really the question of what is the animating principle then? The animator, which is life. So I've been like tuning in more and more to these words and these like basically objects of worship, actually. Um, and there's the animator, the animation of my body, and which to some degree my mind. And I don't want to get too like, I'm not saying there's no free will necessarily, but the animation is occurring. And we can call that desire, that animating force, but it also is what we call life. And I've really loved connecting with the word life lately. Um, the life moves us because that which doesn't move is what we call dead. That's really the, the distinguisher as far as we're concerned. Because even
Yeah.
organisms that are very still, but they're still another synonym, change itself. There's just change occurring on certain organisms that seems to be in a different direction than the principle of gravity, and we call that life. And then another word, which is a grander, s- more like large, supreme word, which is nature. And there's different cultures that have quote unquote worshipped nature. And I think sometimes it's easy to see that as like some kind of primitive thing. And I don't know how the individual humans of those cultures saw it. But I do find that the word nature is a very powerful term for the totality of all that is, and specifically like the animation of all that is. Um, because it doesn't actually make any claim on it being a particular deity or a particular anything. It's just recognizing what's happening, and we're saying that is that nature has it so. We don't know who's animating nature, if anyone, but it is occurring. Um, and so and this is all tying back to the flow state, but when I've sometimes been going deep within and attuning to this feeling of desire, which then I started to identify as just a impulse and an animating force toward movement of the body. And then, well, where's that coming from? And then that's where I find that saying the word nature can be very profound. And that is the point at which it can become integrated with the idea of God and a universal mind. Even if that's not necessarily like a conscious entity or being, I think one can be like totally atheistic and not even believing that consciousness is anything beyond emerging from physical phenomenon, which is totally possible. Um, you can be totally in that belief and still have this concept or maybe even felt experience of an intelligence that animates your body that is a little potentially distinguishable from your experience of your conscious identity mind. And that same intelligence that's animating you has been subtly modulated in the DNA and all the different layers of information is a little different in your body, but the core force seems to be almost identical between all living things. Whether or not that means there's one
Right.
collective ecosystem that forms one mono intelligence that is self-aware that we call God is it's that is up for conversation. But independent of that, that's why I loved settling in the word nature. Nature moves me, and I think it's so powerful to experience the animating force of self as nature. It's so powerful, and I looked into etymology of nature from Latin, and it did refer to life, and then it also referred to be born. And there's lots of other layers of that, but um, I know I kind of went off there a little bit, but I want to.
No,
This is so potent stuff
I
for
mean,
me.
it's
This is what I
reminding.
wanted to say for a while, so I'm glad that this is happening. Um, I'll just finish. Go
Well,
ahead. Go ahead. Actually,
I
yeah, yeah.
what's coming up for me is like spontaneous order, and I actually dra- just drafted this blog post about this topic of intrinsic motivation, and I was tying in the economic concept of spontaneous order into one's daily decisions, and when you're in touch with the spontaneity of the organic flow of life, then you naturally are creating solutions and
Yes,
building or whatever.
spontaneous
So
order.
that's free market economics. And our mutual friend Gabriel Mitchell was on the show a few months ago, and he was bringing this metaphor in of the ecology of a free market, and like the environment, and then like um the unencumbered ecosystem in the forest is just naturally flowing in spontaneous order. And so a human economy can be like that ecological ecosystem. And that also can be happening in the individual level with your own like family system of your psychology. Like, am I in a spontaneous order flowing dynamic as I move through my day?
Totally. Which is for me, like saying, like I said, is nature, am I being moved? Well, it's all nature, so I don't want to say, am I being moved by nature, but how surrendered is my body to the flow of nature?
Yeah.
And that's where I was getting it to of like the idea when people say I am God and all of that is it's like,
Right.
well, and then even like some of the Eastern ideas or Alan Watts says like you are, a wave is a single wave of the ocean and the wave is the ocean, but it's also a wave very distinct from the ocean. But it's in movement and it's a little harder to draw the
Right.
lines on an ocean wave from the ocean than it is to draw the line. It's easier to see a human and draw the line between that human and another human than between one wave and the next, um, because it's not a liquid. But the core principle is similar.
Right.
But I want to go just a little bit beyond that. I think sometimes that can be superficial, that are overused as people have gotten into the idea of like unity consciousness. And for me, that nature thing of what I was saying about it is like, oh, if there is this I experience, if there's a felt sense of a distinguished self experience, that is nature. That in that intelligence that moves me is what I call me as one version of it. And that's where it was like, from a very grounded and logical, understandable way, I've started to be able to experience more of that concept of unity consciousness and unity identity. Unidentity. That's cool. Um, that's really cool. Unidentity. But to be able to be with that as logical, as like, oh yeah, there is an animating force within that I seem to have some direction and impulse with that is in some ways autonomous. Um, but it's also in some ways so much more than me alone. Within my
Yeah.
body, it's only this. But um yeah, I've been finding that that unity with what I'm calling nature is probably a similar state that I believe when people touch in certain moments, I think that the logical mind in that moment often creates the meaning of mental thoughts of this is God, or this is a specific deity, or I'm having or whatever it is, or this is self, this is myself, I am God, any of it. I think that often what might be happening is just that the mind is relaxed enough to experience unity with the animating principle of nature that is what you are. Um, that relates to obviously flow state because I think, well, it doesn't matter, just flow state. I think it's actually quite profound and beautiful to be able to be conscious and having values of logic and also being able to create ways for the mind to be willing to experience that unity and that experience of being animated by something that is far older than oneself, but still connected to oneself. And I think that being able to access that in a way that the logical mind accepts, I think is a something that can continue to be worked on. Because I think that a lot of people don't experience the stillness of unity, because the people who have promoted it made it sound like that moment means some theological conclusion. Whereas if we can access that moment, that flow state, that total um, present moment where there's no longer a conscious separation of self and experience, I just think that, yeah,
Yeah.
accessing that can be, well, I think, again, it's not contrary to hustle. At the deepest level, fully integrated, that will result in probably more effective action ever being taken in an entire lifetime.
100%. I love this flow. I love how we've weaved these ideas over the past hour with this topic. And I want to shift a bit. However, I think we can segue in, um, because I know we wanted to talk about this idea of supporting somebody or whatnot when it comes
Oh,
to
yeah.
a fellow human who's in a state where perhaps parts of them are not getting needs met, and we were voice messaging back and forth quite a bit around these different ingredients, from empathy to asking questions to giving solutions. And I think there's a tie-in to how we've
Wow. This is
been
profound.
going the past
Yeah, there is
hour.
a tie-in.
Yeah,
Wow.
because we're like, what is that, like that highest capital S self of the flow state is like, and you're fully in motion in movement with your highest desires and maturest desires. Um, there's an interesting tie-in. guess I just want to note that as we continue to philosophize, I'm like, I've just been in this place, and I think you're in a similar place. But when it comes to philosophizing about any of these types of topics, like, okay, what is the ideal way or an ideal way to support a friend who's feeling sad? Like, my meta philosophy is that there's not a way. So like all the ideas that
Yeah.
we're going to flow into here, like my meta philosophy is there's no prescription, there's no how to, there's no optimal conclusion. Um, However, there there are a lot of ideas. There's a well of ideas from which to draw to apply in everyday life in the spontaneity of the present moment, based on the circumstances. Um, so that having been said, I want to kind of bring it to that, like, because basically I'll just be transparent. I had this moment a month ago or so where I just, for whatever reason, parts of me were just feeling kind of down and deflated, and I actually didn't really know. I didn't really know why. I still don't really know why necessarily, but there was like, there was a few different, there was a collection of variables, and then I had this moment, and parts of me were feeling sad and down, and frequencies like that, and then I forget exactly the sequence, but I shared that with you in a voice message, and then you replied with like some more upbeat encouragement, and
The
then and
solution
then
at the
that
end of it. Yeah.
yeah, as well as like an advice of like what to do, and that stimulated this whole meta conversation about optimal ways to support somebody who's in that frequency, or who has parts that are in that frequency.
Totally.
And I my emphasis a lot of my life has been the power of empathy, and I've drawn a lot of influence from Carl Rogers, who is the who Marshall Rosenberg studied with, and I want to read a quote or two from Carl Rogers, and then we can kind of go from there. But like, this idea of being with what is, and being with the sadness, being with the lack of motivation, and rather than seeking to uplift. Um, so one of his quotes is, when the other person is hurting, confused, troubled, anxious, alienated, terrified, or when he or she is doubtful of self-worth, uncertain as to identity, then understanding is called for. The gentle and sensitive companionship of an empathic stance provides illumination and healing. In such situations, deep understanding is, I believe, the most precious gift one can give to another. So he was
I love
really
that.
a special man, I really believe. And you can see videos on YouTube of him actually in psychotherapeutic sessions. And he's just reflecting back what he's hearing empathetically. And he really emphasized that as his philosophy of psychotherapy, of simply non-judgmental, empathetic listening and so forth. And I've kind of asserted that in contemporary culture that this is a missing ingredient, it's sort of a deficiency, perhaps. And there's so
Yeah.
much emphasis on, well, let's solve this, let's solve this. Um, and then I believe that there's often a power in just, like he says, provides illumination and healing, and like simply providing that care and presence, understanding, and so forth, and that person is allowed to move through those feelings and those parts, and then return to self potentially on their own, without any solutions being presented. That's what I think like it's both like a very like there's this companionship piece where like, hey, I'm with you, brother, I'm with you, and then let me reflect what I'm sensing, let me illuminate what I'm hearing, and just shine love on that, and then that person can receive that and move through that moment and step back into their self, into their power. And I sense that is often a deficiency in the culture at the moment, and there's like a just like a saturation of advice giving. However, like there's you were bringing it up in our conversation on the voice messages around. In some situations, there's often a value of just getting right to it. Like, hey, let me help activate you to like be in that self. Um, so yeah, and last thing I'll say to illustrate this, and many people might be familiar with this video where there's like a couple and there's a woman sitting on the couch and she's got a nail on her head or in her head, and then she's trying to like explain to her, her significant other that my head keeps hurting all the time and I just can't figure out what's going on and it's always in pain. And then he's trying to like, hey, you could take out the nail, and then she's like, why do you try to fix my problems? I just want like she's getting frustrated because he's trying to solve it for her. And then he finally is just like, yeah, that sounds hard. That sounds like it's tough. And then she's like, thank you so much. um, and so there's like it's an interesting thing because sometimes we could possibly provide that solution that would be effective, but perhaps sometimes that person just needs the empathy. So I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I think that coming back to the nature stuff and the authentic desire, I think what is true for everyone, I think that when someone else experiences dis-ease in their body, our authentic and mature desire that has no craving or need to have it change right now in them. I think that we all have the mature, authentic, kind of deep self desire to help that person and their nervous system downregulate and return to ease. I think that's one of those nature desires. No matter how much I've intellectualized, like there's a desire for the totality of humanity to be at peace with each other and internally. And I believe that every single person has that desire. That's not just a faith. I think that's a mechanism of the nervous system for one's own survival and for the survival of our species. And so I think we all have that if someone that we love is expressing a dysregulation, then we have an authentic desire to help them to return to regulation or balance or ease. And then the question just becomes, well, what is the way back to ease for them? And I think that whether or not someone feels like they're being fixed or whether or not they feel supported, I think is in how much tension is in the other person when they're helping them back to their state of ease. And I think what it is if the other person, if the one giving support, if their parts system has any parts that are activated with their frequency of rejection in the subtle tones
Right.
of, well, that needs to change. You can't be feeling that way. If there's
Right.
if there's any level of tension, which again, same as we talked about in the beginning, there's a desire for you to feel ease because you're feeling dis-ease. But if I have any like kink in the hose, if I have anything, whether it's a part, a trauma, a limiting belief, if there's anything in my system that has tension around me wanting to fulfill my desire for you to feel ease, then I think that your nervous system might pick up on that and feel like it's fixing. But if I am like, so if I've integrated whatever it is in me that's uncomfortable with sadness in others, which means I'm
Right.
uncomfortable with, which likely means I'm uncomfortable with sadness as a thing, including in my own nervous system. If that's And by uncomfortable, I just mean if when there's sadness, that emotional state, there's something else that comes up that's trying to change it quickly because there's a feeling of fear around it. And I think if someone can detect that fear, then they feel like, and they might not call it that, but then it feels like, oh, you're trying to fix me because there's a subtle rejection going on. And so in some ways, I think that the purpose of the quote unquote empathy is really when we're fully embodied, we're present and connected to someone else's nervous system and where it's at. And we're able to, in a way, I think that the spaciousness of some empathy or some reflection can be a demonstration that they're not being rejected, which can create greater safety for their own nervous system to downregulate on its own. Because I think that sometimes they have an inner rejection of that feeling. And like the spaciousness of another person reflecting and quote unquote holding the space. I don't actually like that term hold, but another person being in presence with them, I believe can almost like it can create the permission for that thing to release as it's receiving reflection from something that's more regulated in that moment. And so I think that you can still, this is the core, I think, integration of all the things we discussed, though, is I believe you can be connected to your desire for them to feel more well and operate in a way that leads to them feeling loved and heard and seen. And in some ways, you are operating that way because you desire for them to feel well, but not from the place of rejection. And it's very subtle, but I think it's very felt for most people. But I think where we get to the reason I call this an integration is because I don't think you can pretend, or you can, but I think we can pretend or disassociate from the fact that our desire for others to feel ease, that is like that exists. And that's like very nature, tribal. Like we have deep hardware programming for that purpose of helping other members of our situation feel ease. There's an animation, like a desire, right? There is an animating
Yeah.
principle within us that wants others who feel at dis-ease to feel ease. We will be animated in a way that will bring their nervous system to ease. And the question is if our animation is happening with limiting beliefs and tension and rejection, then they feel like that. But if our animation to help them to regulate is not constricted, then we'll have full access to the total subconscious power of our experience and will likely show up with a great deal more tenderness and gentleness because it truly will result in them feeling better faster than the feeling of trying to fix them. But if it's coming from the place of, oh, well, now I know that that's how I have to do it to fix them, then it's still not quite there. But and so I think there's nuance there, which
Right.
is why I keep repeating it because I do think that it is subtle, but it's a significant thing. And that's why I identify it not so much as the desire for someone to feel well. Obviously, isn't the thing to shift. It's something about the way they feel the desire, because everyone has had someone show up to support them where that person didn't feel like they were trying to fix them, but they also weren't indifferent. I think that's where I can kind of complete that's the wraparound. Is I There's a form of passive listening that feels like indifference, and people don't quite like that. We don't really
Right.
quite like that either. That's why I think the integration is it's not just listen, it's be connected somatically to the animating principle of desire that is me wanting to help, but fully accepting that in my own body so that there's no urgency. So I can like feel that as love for this person while I'm listening. Because in that moment, listening and reflecting is the way by which I will help them. And so I'm connected to that. I know I'm kind of repeating intentionally over and over. I'll pause
That's it.
there,
I
but I
mean, I
think it
think,
is all the same thing in a way. I just wanted to give that overall my perception of what's happening there for people.
well, you used one of my favorite words is while. And so when we're philosophizing about these matters, like that's such a valuable word to recognize that more sophisticated integration thinking. Uh, and I think what you said about it's more about what the 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 presence of what the nervous system is emanating from the person supporting uh versus any words specifically that they say. It's really more about what the vibe is. Are you communicating somatically, non-verbally, that ethos, essence of empathy, acceptance, understanding, presence, connection, and tapping into that flow, that momentum of like there's genuine capital S self desire to support you so that you can feel at ease and well. Um, so I think that is the meta here around what is the vibration you are sending, um, and are you free of projecting? Yeah, like you said,
Yeah,
if you're projecting your own insecurity that this person is not well, which could come back from your early childhood where like you were told that it's not okay to cry or something like that, and then you didn't experience an acceptance from your parents around the messiness of emotions and so forth, then you may be projecting a part of you that's like we need to end this right now.
exactly.
Which is why I think it's interesting how to see young, like new parents respond when their young child is crying. Like, is there a fierce, like sympathetic response? Like this is bad, right? Of course, there could be all sorts of other beliefs that are getting activated. Like if especially the child's crying in public, like is that parent upset or scared that they're going to be judged or something. But it's also like if they haven't processed their early childhood experience around like there are emotions happening, and if they didn't get full acceptance for those types of moments, then that cycle just can perpetuate. Um, so I guess to sum up what I'm saying is yeah, ideally we're in this full capital S self state, and we're free of projecting any insecurities around the other person's state. And I would add that the person who's in the sad state or whatever, um, I guess just speaking for myself, I think I've actually, because I've like kind of created this lens for myself, for better or for worse, that it's so rare for people to give me empathy or acceptance. That could go back to my own childhood. Um, but I've kind of I have this lens going where I'm like, my subjective experience is that I've had so many moments with close friends or not close friends or just different people where I like, express something, and then I experience what I think is like this advice epidemic. People giving me solutions, solutions, solutions. Where I think I've actually cultivated like a nervous system protective mechanism against people giving me advice. Because like when I expose my vulnerability and there's like almost a protective part that's like I don't even think I'm gonna get the acceptance because people aren't, because it could be the case that there are a lot of people right now in the culture that aren't comfortable with just being with the sadness. Um, and
I
so
would say the
that
majority,
may, yeah,
vast
yeah.
majority.
So I'm just saying, as the person like in our little moment, like I think there's a lot of variables there, but one of those was just like my macro, that protective mechanism that was like, I don't know if I'm going to get that full, this part of me was like, I'm not sure I'm going to get that full acceptance. Um, because of that part's just, I'm projecting my own thing, my own lens around how I've experienced this, um, with all sorts of people. And so I'm like, you know, not as receptive. I'm kind of feeling on edge at the meta level. Um, does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think
So I mean, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everything's kind of messy right now for a lot of humans as we evolve through this stuff.
Yeah, I identify in this moment, and what I it's funny, so before I got into belief work or internal family systems, my whole healing philosophy was just about feeling. And I thought that there's stuck
Yeah.
energy and and the resistance toward the movement. It's just like what we're talking about. The resistance toward the movement of the felt sensations, if released, would result in the total healing of this particular psychological situation. And I felt like that was, in some ways, objectively true with certain types of emotional phenomenon. It may not be the totality of mental health, but I felt that before I discovered any methods to like, quote unquote, clear the root. And all of the healing work, all the limiting belief clearing, all the different somatic things really in some ways do point back to allowing sensations to move without resistance, which is the same thing as the other animating force stuff. It's actually all the same, amazingly. But I bring that up because when you talk about, maybe even an empathy epidemic, I think that
Vice
yeah, all
epidemic.
of that, yeah, and a lack of empathy. I guess that's yeah,
Empathy
yeah.
starved advice epidemic.
I think that what's really happening, and if we wanted to like quote unquote diagnose what's going on, I don't know if I'm hesitant to always use the word problem anymore, but if we were to diagnose the desired change, it would be, I think, at a more first principles level, a cultural a suppression of feeling. And I don't want to say suppression of feeling, but just on a literal scale, I guess it would be that we have a reaction to tense and constrict our bodies when we notice certain feelings. Some of us have taken on that habit of constricting and tensing areas of our body when we feel certain sensations. And then it adds another layer of the tension. And then we often will tense against that one and constrict against that one. Nathaniel Brandon says, can you eventually find the point where you're not resisting the resistance of your own somatic emotional
Yeah.
experience? That's Nathaniel Brandon. And it's very powerful to really connect with that. And when it comes to the empathy thing, I really do think that that is the core. I think that sometimes if somebody is expressing something, that if I felt that sensation in my body, if I have a habit that my body would tense up, then it might tense up against their when they do it, when they express that. And it can happen so subtly and subconsciously that I may have a little extra urgency in my offering of a solution. Um, that I may not even, many of us may not even be conscious that that's what's happening. All we know is that we just feel this little extra to try to like get something in them to change. And it can be mostly embodied in this sincere, authentic desire to help. So that's why, like I said at the beginning, a
Right.
desire can express in a tense way. It's so cool how this all comes full circle like that. Even for supporting people, our own desire can express in a tense or a relaxed way. Um, and and I bring it up because I think even just for you and just in general, the power of just identifying a major area of change for humanity is our relationship, and specifically to the West, and specifically the United States. Major possible change is our relationship to our feelings. And I think that a person who is comfortable feeling is comfortable helping someone else who is feeling.
Yeah. I
I
think
really think
that's
that's the
really the
core. I
crux
think
of
that's the
it.
really, and I think it's really actually it feels for me at first it's a little like there's parts of me that might even have some limiting fears of like, oh, but that's a big problem to change. That's like the core. But like it really I went back, even I used to think about like Jesus and these different concepts of like, yeah, just I think that certain people that have been sages are respected, or regardless of whether or not people agree with everything they said, whether it's Jesus, Buddha, or more atheistic, very calm people. I think that a very deep core to people who have been seen as wise is the ability to be with what they are feeling. And people feel that in someone, and there's like something different. And it does feel like they're present and compassionate with you. So, yeah, just
It's true unconditional love. Like whatever is, I love. Like there's no
exactly,
meta shame
exactly.
about the fact that you have these feelings, right? It's like, yeah, you have these. This is idea. Seems to be what the original teachings of Jesus were. It's like, even if you have these imperfections, you made this error. It's like the love is just unconditional. And so I think the crux of the matter is when I'm identifying what seems to be this epidemic is probably the primary cause is like people's just not feeling anchoring in this in their own bodies to actually accept their own feelings, and so then that projects out when they see somebody else in that state, and it's that disassociation and whatever that's the main reason we have so much solution oriented versus just like this acceptance. The
Lack of acceptance of one's own
just
feelings.
yeah, yeah, and so
So
we got to keep on fixing and changing.
anytime somebody feels like someone's trying to fix them, it may not come immediately, but it's worth remembering that if someone feels that way, that it's likely that this other person is feeling uncomfortable with something they're feeling.
Yeah, which like it's funny because I have that meta perspective. Like I can intellectually at least know if someone's giving me advice when actually what I think the parts of me need is more care, love, acceptance. Um,
I guess what's
I can.
sorry.
Well, let me
No,
just
sorry,
finish.
yeah.
I can intellectually get that that person's not comfortable with me having this vulnerability right now, and I can have like
Exactly.
compassion for them. But at the same time, like these parts of me were like, hey man, I could use a little bit of,
Totally.
so like the parts aren't like necessarily satisfied with that perspective because it's like
Well, it's
I don't
putting the
know. I
burden
guess
on the
that's like
person that feels
I'm
like they need support.
exactly. That's where I
Which
sensed that that's been my subjective experience sometimes. It's like I'm like, am I I'm I sense all this that this is where the culture is at, and so I kind of almost put pressure on myself a little bit where I'm like, well, I'm probably not going to get I'm not going to get what I want so often from if I express something like that. That I'll need to just be aware that this person's probably going to project in some way. I don't know. Maybe I'm just creating that reality with my own narrative around it,
might be
but
true for a lot of it might be
there's
true
there's
for the
something true there I think as well.
I think that like we said, there's no prescription. Of course,
Yeah.
it's gonna depend on the person and the situation. And that was another layer as I realized, like, how much our relationship to feeling is so nuanced and actually worth, I think, greater inquiry. And this is also something I'm saying to myself in this moment. Like, I said this, I remember I messaged you and Caitlin years ago when I was in Guatemala that I had this realization as well. And every time I remember it, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm surprised. Like, there might even still be some additional layers there because someone might have healed different limiting beliefs and different resistances toward like feelings in general. Like some people, they go to some kind of psychedelic ceremony, and the fact that they're feeling is the most challenging day of their entire life. And then there's others who, like, in given contexts, they've now allowed their nervous system to create that space. And so they can like be comfortable with it in principle and under certain conditions, but still not in general. And I do think that the shift that gets into like the change the world frequency, I mean, it's all changing, but how you impact billions of lives, I do think it's when there's people walking the streets in abundance who are deeply comfortable showing up in the frequency of like a reverent support of others at any, not, I don't want to say at any time, not self-sacrificially, but you know, for some reason I always think of New York. I don't know why, but I just think of like someone at the convenience store who's struggling and the person behind them just like buying their thing and then talking to them on the bench for half an hour outside about what they're going through. I just feel like these tears coming right now. Like that
Yeah.
for that embodiment where it's no longer um, constricted to a session or a ceremony, but where we are simply showing
Yeah.
up in support of our fellow humans um, whenever we can. I think that. So I brought that up to say this is nuanced. Right, and I think there's more nuance than it's like some people are uncomfortable with emotion. I think that the subtle limiting beliefs about different feelings can actually cause what I'm describing. So, like, sure, someone has cleared the general experience that emotions are bad or unlovable, but there may still be these other layers of feeling like, oh, it takes a lot of energy to process that. Or I have to, even the concept of holding space. That's a burden that I'm
Yeah.
the one holding something up. These are all concepts. All you're doing is sitting there, you know, and you're breathing, you're doing whatever you're doing. But the concepts I
Yeah.
think can actually modulate some of that urgency to have someone else feel better quick. Because I think it might not just be I reject it completely, but it might be that someone, I think this is where it's really relevant. If someone feels like they're busy, but if someone simply asked them, "Can you hand me a glass of water?" They can probably do it because their concept of handing the glass of water usually is easy enough that they can just hand it over to the next guy at the next computer or whatever is going on. But if someone says, "Can you listen to me for only 5, 10 minutes?" But if there's a feeling like it requires great energy and bandwidth, like, oh, emotions take a lot, or feelings are like a lot of energy and it's like a whole thing.
Right.
Any sort of like dramatization of it, I think can also result in that urgency to help the person quick. So I don't think it has to be a full rejection. Whereas that same person though, if it was like a formal, like special reverent moment, they'd be like down, like really present, really loving. Um, and I think I'm realizing this moment, but that transition to being someone that can support people at any time, non-self-sacrificially, but to not ever tense up like, oh boy, there's this thing they need help with and they're really upset or whatever. But just being able to I'll finish by saying like there was a man in Austin and we used to go to Barton Springs, a bunch of us on the free side. And this one gentleman, his name is Gabriel. He was old. He was older than all of us. He's probably like 60 and he was into somatic healing work. And when we were all hanging out at Barton Springs, Gabriel would talk to homeless people about all of their problems, including like meth addiction, everything. And very quickly, people are like sharing all of their shit. And he's like just sitting there listening, kind of just like presently. And they'll talk for a long time. And he was able to create that. They're just like talking to him. But to that, it felt so normal. He's just a dude without his shirt on at Barton Springs who's just like sitting on the bench. He's like, hey, what's up? And now they're just chatting it up. And I saw people receive like real help, and like I just knew like, wow, when more of us can show up like that for everyone, where 30 minutes when we're at the park can result in that person's life changed forever and everyone else's. Like I notice I'm still wanting to become that. And I have my own limiting beliefs or fears of like, oh, can I, you know, do I show up like that? Can't,
So I'm curious, was he in those moments, was he more just giving empathy or is he giving any suggestions?
Well, his particular
Do you
methods,
remember?
again, I wouldn't use the word empathy, but he's like a little more intellectual about co-regulating the nervous system, but is very aware
Right.
of how much listening and like
Yeah.
deeply breathing. I mean, he would get pretty deep with people in terms of just like, it wasn't just empathy, but there would be him being more silent, right? And asking some questions. Um, but he was often calm enough, I think, that he didn't give a lot of reflective It would be more just people I think felt grokked, probably at a pretty deep level. Um,
Well, I think questions is a form of empathy, potentially, especially again if you're in that somatic state of acceptance just by being in that state, you're communicating non-verbally that you accept. Um, yeah, the questions piece we didn't get to yet. I think I was kind of making this metaphor around if we have these minerals of um, sodium, potassium, magnesium,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
sort of like solutions, empathy, and questions. Like I guess I was doing solutions, questions, empathy, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and I was like, we have magnesium deficiency, just like we have an empathy deficiency, and there's a lot of sodium, there's a lot of there's a lot of solutions right now, and then there's like some questions, there's some potassium, but I think questions is super valuable as well, where it's just being curious. And that's part of understanding. It's part of attuning. Actually, I'll read this other quote, shorter one from Carl Rogers. He says, "Empathy is a special way of coming to know another and ourself, a kind of attuning and understanding. When empathy is extended, it satisfies our needs and wish for intimacy.
correct.
It
Wow.
rescues."
Wow.
Hold on.
I've just learned more about intimacy than my whole life, man. I've often like wanted to understand the concept more, and I do feel like I can connect with people deep, but that was a beautiful definition. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to highlight that. Can you repeat that last line about how empathy
There's one more line.
and oh, I know, but I literally I did interrupt because I just wanted
Okay.
to be like,
No,
wow.
I know your authentic
What was
enthusiasm
the
shines.
I just can repeat it through the end line. Thank you.
Okay, when empathy is extended, it satisfies our needs and wish for intimacy. It rescues us from our feelings of aloneness. So so intimacy, attunement, understanding. These are all. It's all this package. Like empathy, I think is a word that has a lot of nuance and ingredients to it that are. It's all like very closely related to attunement and understanding, intimacy, and so curiosity and questions is and more of like that the conceptual like what is actually happening is a piece of empathy, which is not just like the heart feeling the feelings with the person. It's like, hey, tell me more about that. So like, how'd you get into this situation where you don't have a place to live? Like, tell me more about what's going on, or like, what are you worried about? Like, why do asking
The
questions
keyword.
to actually get clarity about what is happening, because oftentimes the solutions are coming and they're not even the appropriate solutions because they don't know what the actual issue
What you
is, but people
just
don't ask
said, I think,
questions.
is one of the most significant variables, wow, of why the advice epidemic may be ineffective. Because, wow, yeah,
Yes.
you actually I think there's a layer. I think that someone at like a more subconscious level, it might feel a little strange if someone's quickly offering solutions because maybe subconsciously there's kind of a feeling of like, well, they don't really know, they don't have the authority yet to give a solution because they
Yeah.
don't have enough information from me to offer a solution yet. Which actually goes deeper into that principle that you said about how different people or sorry, we said, like, it's never a prescription, it's different circumstances, which is why I do think the empathy and the asking questions is, I often first, because then I think someone will act well, actually, the the literal truth is you're more likely to offer a useful solution if you understand the
Yeah.
full scope of the situation, and I think that people a more accurately useful situation is gonna be more resonant for somebody anyway, and so understanding what is happening before offering a solution. I mean, in the case I think the homeless people is the greatest example, like, those there's not what I would almost say is movement, what we're calling solutions, right, action, in some ways, I'm hesitant to say it requires a certain state of nervous system. because I don't want to like place limiting beliefs that if you feel exhausted or tired, you can't do things. It's not true. And I actually overcame that myself, and it was very powerful to realize even if I feel like I don't have the bandwidth, quote unquote, I still can act. And there's another layer of that, of recognizing that there's a time for action. And then there's a time where the nervous system might not really feel available for action. And I think that often if someone's needing quote unquote empathy, it's their nervous system isn't in the action. Um, I guess we could say like the hat, like their nervous system doesn't have the action hat on, like or not in that position, or like
Yeah.
in a sport, it's not in that position. That's like I think this is a deep feeling of I'm so happy to articulate this because that's what I've often said is like there's an intuitive and logical way to understand whether or not it's time to offer a solution. And I think I like this language of like a stance, like their nervous system, their body, their whole I'm gonna call it the person may not be positioned in that moment to be thinking about solutions yet. And I think that that is where and I think that that's because it's a co-regulation, and I think it does boil back to even, like, safety at the deepest level. Like, their nervous it's kind of like,
Yeah.
when if you get chased by a lion, and then you go and hide in a cave, you're gonna stay still for quite a while, and then eventually in that, allowing yourself to be in that, eventually you'll start to poke your head out the cave and start to look around, and little by little, the safety or the bandwidth or the availability for action will progressively increase. And I think the same is true when being with someone while they're feeling any form of fear or unease. Um, is that it's simply recognizing whether or not someone is available at this time for action or for thinking about action. And if not, supporting in a different way. And I think that that comes back to that comfort with feeling because I'm realizing if I feel uncomfortable with what someone else is feeling, I may experience some tension if about the fact that they're not ready to create solutions. Um, but yeah, just to wrap that up, I think that there's a lot of power in just recognizing like, is this person primed and positioned at this time to be thinking about action? And if not, then it might be time to listen and maybe ask questions depending on if they're even primed for that. Like
Yeah.
with the
Yeah. I
homeless
think
guys, I don't I guess I was last thing to say as a last example, sorry, but with the homeless guys, I think sometimes because again, I wasn't listening to every conversation. It was sometimes from a distance, we'd all be kind of hanging, but he'd be over there. But sometimes right next to me, I mean, we were all chatting with this one kind of younger guy in his 20s who was like doing meth right there. And um yeah, out of pipe. It was gnarly. And Gabriel was just still chatting with him as he's like whipping out his pipe. He's like, "Is it okay if I do this?" And he's like, "Yeah, whatever." Total not phased. No like nervous system upset. Just like, yeah, the guy's about to hit some meth and we're gonna keep listening about his life. I was very impressed with Gabriel with that and it really inspired me. And but like I don't think that was the time to tell him not to do that's the best example. That was not the time to tell the guy not to have the meth.
right,
Maybe it
right.
was. It's a whole debate. We could have a whole debate about that. But as a general principle, when you're just some random homeless guy and there's this older dude who's just chatting with you about your life, if he had felt rejected in that moment, the beauty of the next hour may not have happened, where he ended up like crying about some of his life. And it really beautiful. And like I don't remember like if he had got permanent healing or who knows, but like, you know, if he had felt rejected. So I guess I bring that all back to say that Gabriel was attuning to if that moment was the time to offer a solution to his addiction. And it wasn't. It was a
Yeah.
time to probably listen. And that's an extreme example where someone like that would probably actually require an extraordinary amount of feeling heard, seen, and understood before they would be even remotely open to or be not even like their conscious mind, before their nervous system is even ready to consider a new action. There would have to be like a prerequisite. So I just
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Prerequisite. I think there's an order of operations. Now we can still have this mindset about simultaneity, and we can still have that while mindset. Like maybe there's a way that maybe I can be both in acceptance and kind of be on the lookout for that moment to move it towards action. But I think that order of operations, and I like the metaphor about like a sport. Like I'm thinking about a baseball player needs to be in his batting stance in the batter's box before he takes that big swing. And oftentimes there's a lot of like preamble, like the batter is like getting ready and getting himself comfortable, settled in, and then same with the pitcher. The pitcher's getting ready, and then finally he winds up and finally throws, and then like there's a setup. It's not the perfect metaphor, but this idea of order of operations, like, is it even possible for us to take action if we haven't done acceptance? And can we even get acceptance if we haven't found out what's going
big
on?
question what you just asked.
So
Can
it's
we
like,
even take action if we've not accepted? I think that that might apply to every single problem of life. And I just wanted to capture that. Can we even
that's what the thing that
You
Brandon
have to
says.
accept
And
what's
so
happening before you can attempt to change it. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, let me tie it to the six pillars of self-esteem. Because the first pillar is the practice of living consciously. Are you aware of what's happening? The second pillar is the practice of living with self-acceptance. Can you accept what is happening? The third pillar is self-responsibility, taking action based on the facts of reality. But if you don't have the facts of reality because you're not aware of them or you haven't accepted them, then the responsibility isn't as achievable. Now, of course, these things are very symbiotic, and it's not just sequential necessarily, but in a sense, it is sequential. And that's why I think it's just essential to underscore, at least for right now, where this culture is at. Um, that's almost my request, is for people to contemplate this. Are you in these moments? And look, this is a practice for me. I'm like, I feel like I every time I'm in a moment where I have the chance to support someone, I'm seeking to have the awareness. Okay, this is an opportunity to show up and flex this muscle and attune and seek to do what I think is actually ideal for this person, rather than go in any default mode. Because I think the default mode for me as well, or at least it's definitely an impulse for a part of me, is excuse me, is to give an answer or a solution. Because it's so, I think everyone can relate to this, where there's like someone's is like, hey, I'm trying to figure this thing out with my business, or I'm not sure, I'm struggling with this lead gen thing, or like, oh, I'm struggling with this relationship. And I think it's so frequent for us in this culture, for many of us, to, when we're listening, even to have thoughts in our head like, oh, I could solve this with this. I have this idea for this person. But like, instead, can we pause in those moments and ask ourselves, okay, do I really understand what's going on? Do I really know what this person just said? Even though I heard their words, do I know what they meant? Can I ask them to clarify more, as well as perhaps offer empathetic statement? But like, it takes some curiosity, um, and even some patience to actually get to the point, right? Like a good salesperson's gonna ask a ton of questions so they actually understand what that prospect's pain is, and then they might offer the solution if they believe it can help. That's a good salesperson, you know. So it's like
That's like foundation.
this just
Yeah.
abundance of empathy and curiosity. Yeah, and then now we can actually get somewhere. And then last thing I'll say though, on the solutions piece as well, we can still be in a Socratic mode. We can still be asking questions about what they want to do. It's like, well, let's say we got to the
I
acceptance
think that tends to be
place.
a result in a more useful solution, usually.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's so much room for growth, I think, in the culture around this empathy, acceptance, and then even when we're at the solutions place, hey, like, what do you think you're going to do? You know, do you think you want to do this or that or something else? And then maybe there's a time where it makes sense for you to give your perspective. Maybe they actually just begging for it, at that point. Maybe they really want your perspective. Or it could be appropriate to say, hey, would you like me to offer a perspective?
I just had
Like getting permission for that?
Yeah, I just had this thought that I don't know if it's universally true, but I think it's a powerful understanding. I've never had it this clean, but it was just, if people desire your perspective, they will ask. Like, I just think that's a potentially a pretty decent, uh, it
A decent
it's a
heuristic.
decent general principle on any conversation topic, in particular with empathy. Like, even if they're not so good at communicating exactly what they need or if they wanna be heard or wanna da da da, if they want your perspective, they will ask. Now, I don't think that means we have to be someone that never offers our perspective if someone doesn't ask, because I think that can be like an own sort of inner resentment toward people not asking and wondering if they ever will or something. I think I've had that at times, but I just wanted to solidify that as you said it. Like when someone is going through something, rather than the word perspective, I again, first principles, ooh, I like this shift. If someone would like to hear your thoughts of any nature, they will likely ask. And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. I think it's also worth noting the difference between a relationship that has history and there's a friendship and versus someone that you just met. Um, so like in terms of maybe there is some situations where it makes sense to go for the friend to go right to solutions. Um, but that's because you have a history and there's like a shared understanding and there could be a context for that. But all in all, I think it's better to just wait until that plays out, until that question comes up.
Exactly. It's quite powerful to sit with, like, wow. It kinda reminds me of TK actually when I was in, starting with Praxis.
Yeah,
With Praxis, there was this powerful thing from the get-go because we were all stoked. We were so amped to be doing this cool thing, and all of our friends were going to college, and we wanted to talk about it. And I wanted to tell everyone what it was, and TK once I think he might have addressed it as one of my questions on a group coaching call, or it might have been later on, I can't remember, but the statement was like, "Say I do this thing called Praxis, it's a alternative to college." And he just said, "And if they're curious, they will ask." And that way you get to know, because otherwise you might be, like, talking to someone who doesn't wanna hear it, and they don't really care, and that's awkward, and then no one wins. And it was just so simple, it was so powerful. He
yeah,
said, "Just give the basic, and if someone really wants to know more, they'll ask. You don't have to tell them, 'Oh, it's this amazing apprenticeship program, da da da.'" And remember, this is a guy who's also kind of trying to market the thing. So he's telling all of his customers, "Don't go and force this down people's throats," which is good, and it's powerful, and that just reminds me of I think I've not really embodied that nearly as much as I'd like in my life, but I would like to. Like, really just
DK is amazing.
oh, yeah, and just
He's doing these. Go ahead.
just speaking the minimal, but not the minimal as in the restrictive, but just what is useful and allowing others to ask for your thoughts. And I think that is especially true with empathy. Um, I do think sometimes it can be a little too constructed and feel fake when people like sometimes I think meta talk is great. When someone is like, "How do you need me to support you? Would you like me to ask you questions or would you like me to listen?" I think that's awesome. And I think sometimes someone who's really needing empathy isn't even resourced enough for that vibe sometimes. And they like, so I think it can be powerful to be able to attune and not necessarily have to like go back into the intellectual, like, we're going to now make a process out of me supporting you. I think sometimes that can throw someone off a little bit. And so that's why I think coming back to that principle of people will ask if they want questions or if they want your thoughts. Um, but it can also all just be intuitive. So I don't need to pigeonhole on that too much. But
I think it's intuitive if you have developed the skill set. So I think that's a way to kind of put a bow on this conversation is like, as we started it, saying there's no prescriptions here. And it comes back to attuning to the moment, and then using intuition to decide which tool to bring out, whether it's empathy, questions, solutions, something in between. Um, I think from a skill development standpoint, it behooves many people right now in the culture to examine these three minerals, as I've said, of empathy, questions, and solutions, and recognize how skilled are you at each of these, and
ooh,
perhaps each of us, or perhaps many of us, are pretty skilled already at giving the solutions. But are we up to par? Do we have equal strength with empathy, questions, and solutions, and even solutions that are in the form of questions, right? It's like a
which can
subcategory.
be felt by
But
someone if you're asking leading questions often. It's a bit,
oh yeah, well, so I spent a year and a half as a Socratic guide, as you know, with children, and the rule, like the rule of thumb was never answer a question. So when the child came to me, um, I was asking questions back to their questions, but I also learned that subtle art of like, oh, I notice sometimes I'm projecting my own bias, and I just ask them a leading question. And part of the training there is to recognize, am I asking a true question that's open ended without any leading question there? So that's a whole nother art. So there's all these skill sets, and if you can get really good at all of it, whether that's just being able to reflect back what feelings and needs you heard that you're sensing that person has right now, to translate what they're saying into like a giraffe consciousness, or maybe it's like, can you get really good at that from the mind standpoint? The questions, can you get into the habit of asking, tell me more, what do you mean by that, or the specific clarifying question, and just developing that curiosity muscle, and then being able to bring the solutions in. So my meta point here is develop the skill set of all of the above, and then your intuition. This is why I think TK is excellent, one of the greatest on the planet, perhaps, as a coach or a counselor, um, because he is very good at all three. And he, I believe, and anyone who's skilled can become attuned and intuitive about what does this moment need. It could be the case that there are moments where it's like, hey, I know you, man. I've been friends with you for 10 years, and like this always happens. I'm just gonna go right to it. I know what's going on here. I don't need to ask any questions. I'm gonna tell you, hey, here's a solution. Now, I think those moments are actually pretty rare because most of the time we actually do need more information.
that's what I was gonna
But it
say
could
is
be
you
the
almost
case.
can't do the solutions
Yeah.
wing if you don't have the other ones dialed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope I didn't interrupt you too much there, but I just had that.
Well, I guess what I just meant, like, there could be certain
Yeah,
rare
okay, sure.
moments where you know a person so well that you actually already get it in a certain moment,
Which I think is actually
because
can be
you've been down
common
this line.
with people that we know, like okay, so here's a funny I'm trying to decide I didn't I mean, are you complete? I actually don't wanna interrupt too much. I wanna make sure.
I think so. Yeah. I also just wanted to emphasize that TK is very good at this. He's developed those skills.
Yeah, that's awesome, especially because he was my personal coach. It was many years ago, but I remember that being true. But I didn't think of it consciously, which means it was true. It was integrated. Um,
It's so natural. It seems so natural for him. Makes it look easy.
yeah, I think, yeah, when you were saying that sometimes the solution, someone just knows someone well enough. Trying to think if I would tell this story, but I will actually, because I've decided that I'd like to continually destigmatize the use of psychoactive substances or natural medicines in general as something that mature, embodied, healthy people can do. Um, this particular use case or story may or may not, but one of the first times I ever smoked weed, which I actually didn't smoke weed for like 8 years after this because it was very intense. But the first time I ever did, or not the first, but one of the first 5 or 10 times for sure. And I had no tolerance. And I did so many hits with a friend who we actually all know, but I won't share their name here, even though they'd probably be fine with it. But I got really high and I was pretty non functional and I was clearly a little bit distressed. And my friend went and got me a glass of water and handed me the glass of water. And he said he had this book that was like the handbook for supporting people who are too high. And you just know that they probably need a glass of water. And you don't need necessarily like he wasn't gonna he wasn't
Right.
gonna ask like, oh, there was something so much more meaningful, especially in the depth of like a deep high, right? Where you're kind of like having a psychological experience for someone to just go and like grab a glass of water and like put a hand on the back and say, here, drink this. You know,
Permissionless
yeah, that
action.
intuitive support.
Sometimes it's better to not ask for
If he had said,
permission.
"Would you like
Yeah.
a glass of water?" I might have not even spoken, you know? And so that's an extreme example of like a nervous system that may not be resourced to think about solutions where, like you said, there are actually probably many situations where there are intuitive ways of support or quote unquote solutions that it can feel very meaningful. Um, and I think with people you know really well, like with the weed thing and the water, that's something almost anyone, if they've been someone who's smoked weed and they have a friend who's trying it and they're like, oh, wow, okay, they need some support. I'm going to get them some water and, a loving energy. That's one thing. But I think as you get to know people very deeply, of course, especially I'm sure in marriages and intimate relationships, and you can just kind of feel,
Yep.
oh, they're a little tense. And you go and start massaging their shoulders or whatever it is, make someone a full 10-course breakfast, or just lovingly be a little more gentle, in an intuitive way. I agree that often there are intuitive actions and solutions, but that's different than trying to get the other person to see their solution. That's a different thing. Um, anyway, good
Mm.
stuff on
Good
the
stuff.
empathy. I didn't even expect to go that
Uh,
deep, but I do accept like, yeah, I just want to.
this is yeah, it's sort of healing for me to like flesh this conversation out because this has been present for me for a while. And I love what you said about just being more okay with feelings for this culture.
Yeah.
It's
I think
just
that's
that's
like that
probably
if you
one of
wanna
the
pull
roots of
one
all this.
lever, I'm talking even free
Yeah.
market, government, economics, stateless
Yeah.
societies, decentralization, like every single thing. I think if you can pull one lever, which is if every human could suddenly be extremely at ease with their own feelings, I think that that lever is a pretty strong one that would cause a lot of other house of cards to fall in a very
Yeah.
gentle and nice way.
Yeah, just being able to sink in to parasympathetic. Um, but I'm not, it's interesting though. I'm actually having like a meta compassion for people not being
That's
able
it.
to do that.
Yep. Bingo.
I'm
Super
like,
bingo.
because actually these parts of me that have been craving to share more of this and to let this out are actually getting more visibility from this conversation, and now that's allowing this compassion. I'm like, oh, why? Like more clarity, curiosity, compassion around. Oh, why is it the case that so many people seem to be deficient in these skills in these minerals, and then it's like, oh, I'm like mourning, how much that like doesn't occur in conventional parenting and education environments. And so it's like I'm feeling compassion towards all the little children inside of everybody who just kind of didn't get that, just that pausing to sink into the feelings. And so there's a sort of a mourning there, a mournfulness around that cycle. And so that's one thing I desire, and yeah, desire to continue to break that cycle through that one piece. That one piece. I felt fulfilled working with those children at this elementary Socratic guide role, because there were several moments where I really was able to apply these ideas where, like, the child's just frustrated about something, and I'm like, hey, you're feeling frustrated about that, huh? And just reflecting it and just being with them, or like asking them questions, and um or just, while rare moments where they're just really distraught in tears, and I'm just present, um and just validating, and those were the moments of the highlights of that experience for me. At least personally, it just felt the most meaningful. I felt like I was in the most capital S self in those moments, and my hope is that there's some sort of positive imprint that I that I made to disrupt this cycle of in the culture that doesn't seem to allow to just it's not normal to allow the feelings to just be there before we try to fix it.
Which is like the somatic prerequisite for the feeling to be able to integrate back into the nervous
Yeah.
system. So it's so fundamental. And I get really curious as to why. I don't know if we want to parse out in totality. I sense that we're moving toward conclusion, but
Yeah.
I do think that the question of what is the real, like, what's the hang up? Because our bodies can feel what we feel. We don't die from it, rarely. Sometimes extreme stress can create heart attacks and strokes, but that's usually also because it's not felt, and there's more and there's an additional super stress that can come from, like, God, I'm feeling this way, and then it just goes over the top. But, like, what's the real source? Because it's people's parents saying, "Don't feel that," but layer of empathy beyond that of, like, why? What was the motivational reason to have people's feelings not be felt? And some people say it's like a deeper spiritual or governmental or intentional, some form of intentional designed thing at some point in our history that we were deluded into thinking that our feelings are bad in order to, like, disconnect us in some way, which I'm not sure if it's like something intentional or if it's just somehow in our evolution that's
Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors, but yeah, one is like the school system training people to be obedient workers. Like, there's a reason that essentially in the conventional system, no, there's no one really checking in with the children about their feelings, and I mean, it can happen, but it's not integrated into the fabric of the environment. Um, because if we were actually to get curiosity about the feelings and the needs behind it, then it can. I mean, Marshall Rosenberg said those who are in touch with their needs don't make very good slaves. And so, getting in touch with your needs also means getting in touch with your feelings that are indicating that the needs are are wanting to be met. So the system of control in that compulsory system isn't incentivized, basically, to develop attunement truly to the feelings. Um, that's one factor.
yeah, and I think that the feeling of feelings is how we that's desire. Desire is felt. So that's just impulse, animating force, nature, life, God, if some people want to say the mystery of animation. But the sorry, I kind of went all
Mystery of animation. That's a cool phrase.
mystery of animation. Oh yeah, that's the question of most religion, I think. Um, but oh yeah. But I didn't mean to go all the way to mystery of animation in that one sentence. So just to rewind it, or not even rewind, to move forward effectively, um, that's how we
Feelings.
identify what we call our needs. That's how we identify what we call our needs anyway, is through feeling our desires
Yeah.
for something. So absolutely, when you said Marshall Rosenberg, the slaves thing, yeah, actually, I would say if you want to get on like the global economic level, people who sort of are just allowing authoritarianism to control their life and their family as an entire collective culture, that indicates that people are not feeling their desire for a free world. And what I mean by that is what we said, this is actually a great way to conclude it in that, or just move toward that direction. Like at the beginning, when we said a desire can express in a stressed way or an unstressed way, the somatic feeling of the desire can move through the body completely uninhibited or so inhibited that it's completely disassociated entirely. That's actually there it is. That's the two polar, those are the
Yes.
two poles of the expression of desire. Complete uninhibited flow state or disassociation almost to the point of non-awareness of the actual authentic desire. And that's felt. And people who aren't feeling the desire to freedom due to limiting beliefs that it's too complicated, too hard, that they're not the one, and so on, to create a free world, that desire is going to be so tensed that then it just becomes totally disassociated from and unexpressed. And then people can be slaves. So that's when you said, Marshall Rosenberg said, people in touch with their needs aren't good slaves. People who are in touch with their feelings at a very deep level will be connected to their desire for a free world for themselves and their families. And if the desire is uninhibited, that will animate them to act in an effortless, easeful way to bring about their desire. Um, and I don't know a lot about the Gandhi story, and I tend to be hesitant to like cite great people of the past for any reason. I think sometimes it can,
Yeah.
just in general, I don't know enough about different histories, and history in general is so just written by us. But my understanding, especially actually reading Napoleon Hill, who talks about it, my understanding is that India was under British kingdom rule. And that at the end of Gandhi's actions, it was not. And my understanding is that it was completely nonviolent. And that somehow through nonviolent, mostly nonviolent means, he had a desire for India to not be under British rule. And by the end, it was not. And the fact there was not violence indicates that the desire may have been felt in a way that was not stressed, which then allows for the intelligence of our own, our full brain, our full nervous system, full subconscious being. If we're not stressed, the desire, even for something that people think is impossible, like freeing a nation from Britain, if the desire is felt without any stress, then maybe it can be fulfilled without any stress. Or at least the mind is more likely to present solutions that don't involve stress if we're feeling the desire without stress. Now, I don't know about Gandhi and whether or not how stressed he was or wasn't, but I do know that, to bring it back to the beginning, if any person can feel their desire for a truly free, peaceful, authentically embodied world, or their nation, if that desire can be felt without any stress and just allowed to exist fully, by even a small number or enough people, that desire fully felt without fear and in total peaceful confidence, I think that that is an independent variable upon which the world gets to be free, is whether or not people are feeling that desire fully, in an uninhibited way, allowing it to animate them intelligently. So
I
it
love
really
it.
is pretty
It's
significant to
desire.
feel our feelings.
It just ties back into the one sphere of control to actually create this liberated humanity, it's like it's through getting in touch with that desire fundamentally. Because if you have the desire, and then as a natural byproduct, you then desire to liberate yourself from the conditioning that's antithetical to the desire, and then you get in touch with more and more desire, and your creativity and your aliveness and all the things. Then that's how we flourish and transcend these domination systems. I'm seeing this quote, the original quote that inspired Praxis: "Ask not what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because the world needs people who have
Yeah,
come alive." And I'm like, wow, this is really so true. Like the desire, it's like that. Then there's no more slavery. There's no more domination, because like you're in touch with your body. You're in touch with these feelings, these needs, and that's the blossoming, the blooming of humanity. It starts with each individual connecting to that. And like I said, when you do that, then it's like you get in touch with your why, your desire for authentic expression and all the self actualization. That is making ripples around you and your community, and even beyond. It's like letting yourself permission to see how much power you have to ripple, because each individual across the globe connecting to desire is actually the bottom up spontaneous evolution of the species, you know?
absolutely. I think I just keep hearing, and I've had this happen about a couple times in the last 2 or 3 years when I was in some pretty, places that were much of my life was not as I desired it to be. And in certain moments like that, it would come through just the most simple solution of feel desire. And I think that that really is kinda like a foundation
Yeah.
step 1 for everyone and for almost anything that we want is just feel desire. And in some ways, let go of needing to identify yet how it's gonna be fulfilled. Not like even just like, "Oh, 'cause of it's gonna happen," but just because I think that if we are fully somatically feeling all desire, I think that the thing will integrate sufficiently that then we'll be able to access easeful action. I really do. That's why I think that being able to become comfortable with the felt desire, no matter what it is, I think is really, yeah, it's just kind of the foundation of that peaceful action, peaceful confidence. Um, and so I think that can be an encouragement for anyone listening or doing anything is just make it a priority to feel desire. All of them, just,
Love
like,
it.
without resistance. Just allow the desire to be felt. That is, like I think that can heal almost any emotional ailment. Feel desire.
I love it.
Nice.
I'm noticing my desire to flow on to the next segment of my day, and but so much gratitude about this conversation, and celebrating this conversation, and the package we've presented is full of juicy ingredients. We made quite the smoothie, my friend, in this conversation.
I drank a smoothie during this
And
conversation. It was delicious. It kept my mind I felt my as we talked about energy, I provided my machine with the fuel that was gonna take for this flow state to be kept going. I'm glad for the
I love it. We made
conversation.
it.
Thank you so much.
Tell us about where people can find you. You have thegift.now as your website that is
Correct.
your emerging brand.
Yeah, emerging.
Anywhere else you want to send people? You have your new podcast on YouTube. You want
Yeah,
to
I can
tell
speak
us
some
where
things.
to go for
So
that.
all things relating to The Gift, which is the organization I founded, are at thegift.now. And we've recently launched a weekly show, which I'm very excited about, which includes a discussion and a meditation or an exercise of some kind, and a DJ set by me. because I find that the music actually can help to integrate whatever the thing is, and also is just wonderful to listen to. So that's an integration of three things. And you can go to thegift.now/show, and all of the episodes will be there right there, including links to all the different podcast platforms to listen on. And then thegift.now/within will bring people to the Gift Within page, which goes over all the different offers of how we actually can help people to feel desire and fulfill it. And that's very exciting. And the gift has many more branches than that, including just a general purpose to celebrate everything and really live a life of deep gratitude. And then also helping others to join in that experience of deep gratitude together. And there's all kinds of different mechanisms that we are going to do that and are already doing that. But for the topics of this show, thegift.now/show, if you want to hear more conversations and things like this, and thegift.now/within, if you want to learn some things about feeling and fulfilling desire.
I love it. I'll get those in the show notes. And yeah, when I'm sure we'll be back in the future to record a whole podcast just about the gift.
I believe.
But yeah, the gift. Yeah, I'm sure we will. The gift within, incredible
Which,
experience that I've experienced as your client. And yeah, Jackson is the one again who showed me this belief liberation technology and has since continued to iterate and cultivate his own styles and versions with that. And yeah, that's a whole other trail that we could go down. But definitely, Jackson is a special human, and I'm glad that for everyone who's made it this far, listen to this full conversation, and I hope this has touched
me
you.
too.
And yeah, I'm just glad we have this newest artifact.
Yeah, me too. I'm really glad. If anyone, for people who listen to the full conversation, I hope it was stimulating and awesome. I think it was pretty good stuff. I hope it's very beneficial for whoever you are.